Great. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the August 13th, 2026 full meeting of the Seattle Planning Commission. We like to start our meetings with a land acknowledgement. So as we begin our meeting, we respectfully acknowledge that our meeting today is taking place on occupied Coast Salish land. We pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history of physical and cultural genocide and settler colonialism, which continues to displace Indigenous people today. It is also to recognize these lands, waters, and their significance for the resilient and wise peoples who continue to thrive in the region despite the consequences of displacement and broken treaties. Those who hold settler privilege in this city must work towards supporting the Coast Salish people and all Indigenous people using the various forms of wealth and privilege we reap due to it. My name is Sia Alvarez, I use she, they pronouns, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seattle Planning Commission along with Nick Whipple. I'll start with a couple of announcements to members of the public and to visitors. First of all, welcome. We're happy to make all commission meetings open to the public, but we do note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings. We're an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make actual decisions. And we encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. This meeting is a hybrid meeting with some individuals participating in the boards and commissions room in Seattle City Hall and some folks online via the MS Teams platform. And we'll just sort of muddle through all of the hiccups that come with that. In addition to a land acknowledgement, we like to start our meetings with color brave space norms. I'd like to invite a commissioner to choose and briefly speak to one of the norms that are on the screen here that they feel has a particular relevance to today's agenda. Given today's agenda, I don't think that should be too much to ask. But I am realizing I can't see the commissioners online now for some reason. Anyway, any volunteers?
I can.
Yay. Yes, Caleb.
Since we're talking about displacement, I would want to focus on practice examining racially biased systems. Systems are what are left after all the people in this room leave. Yeah, obviously.
For all of the reasons. Great, thanks, Caleb. If there's no amendments or modifications, I'll suggest that we all agree to these norms. I'm not hearing any. Okay, so we'll do a quick round of introductions. I've been recommending that we go around the room first when I'm in the room because I'm here. And I've been leading meetings. And then we'll do the folks online. But my name is Sia Alvarez. I use she, they pronouns. I live in White Center, Highland Park. And for my day job, I'm an architect and urban planner at Element Architects. I'll pass to TJ.
Hey everyone, I'm TJ Stutman. My pronouns are he, him. In my day job, I work in the King County Executive's budget team.
Andy Dannenberg, he, him, live in Northeast Seattle, and I teach at the University of Washington in public health and urban planning.
Hi, Caleb Twolday, he, him pronouns. I live over in Beacon Hill and I work at a program called Rainier Scholars.
Michaela Daffern, I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing and policy and planning. And I will pass it to Haley.
Hey everyone, I'm Haley Karcher. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Columbia City and I work for Seattle Public Schools in the enrollment and planning department. My Teams is doing a thing where I can't see anyone's name. So can someone else who's online introduce themselves? Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Quintana, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill. For my day job, I am a multimodal transportation planner, and I'm going to pass it over to Margaret.
Hi, everybody. My name is Margaret Zealous, she, her pronouns. I live in the Fremont-Ballard area, and I am in between graduating law school and starting up my job in the fall. I'm going to hand it over to Dylan Stevenson.
Hi everyone, my name is Dylan Stevenson. I use he, they pronouns. I live in the International District, and for my day job, I teach urban planning at the University of Washington. And I will pass it along to Rose.
Hi, Rose Luchelowitz, pronouns they, them. I'm up north in Licton Springs, Northgate area, and I'm a wetland biologist and permitting specialist for my day job with Jacobs Engineering. Dylan G, are you on and able to talk?
Yeah, I am on my way to the room, so I'll be there in a few minutes. But
Ah,
Dylan
the red.
Glosecki, yeah, you can see where I am. I'm in the red room. I'm almost there. Dylan Glosecki, you see him pronouns. I live in the Central District. I'm an architect and urban designer for Perkins Eastman. Who hasn't gone yet? Can staff
I
help
can go
me
next.
out? Great, thanks.
This is Amir Isai. I use he, him pronouns, and I live in the Greenwood district. And for my day job, I'm a sustainability engineer working on hyperscale data centers for Meta.
Let's go to staff. Robin.
Robin McGonigal. I use she, they pronouns. I live on Vashon Island and I am staff for the Planning Commission.
Hello, next. Hi, everyone. Olivia Baker, she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the Planning Commission.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm staff to the Planning Commission.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll wrap us up. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns, and I too am staff for the Seattle Planning Commission. Thanks for joining us today. Back to CEO.
Yeah. So on our agenda today, we only have one item, but we'll be briefed by staff from the Office of Planning and Community Development on anti-displacement strategies to implement the One Seattle Comprehensive Plan. We'll also have a brief update from staff on some of the commission's independent work at the end, but it seems likely that will end early. Before we do any of that, we need to approve our July 23rd, 2026 meeting minutes. I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved, Michaela.
Second.
Sweet. Are there any changes or amendments to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed? Oh. And any abstentions? All right. And just to give a quick report out on our upcoming commission meetings, there is a Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting scheduled for Thursday, August 20th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. online via the Teams platform. That is canceled.
That's my fault. I apologize.
That's all good. I was like, I'm pretty sure I saw that come through. So don't go to that meeting. And then our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 27th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. Just for, I guess, longer tenure commissioners, that meeting's often canceled, but this year, given some of the work that we are planning independently, we think that we'd like to try and have that meeting. So look out for the read and reply from Robin, and please try to respond. And then I'll pass it over to Vanessa.
Great. Thank you, Zio. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging that this is Margaret's last meeting with us. Margaret is our Get Engaged member. A year goes by really quickly on the Planning Commission, even though we meet 6 times a month. So I just really want to thank Margaret for your service and wish you the best in your future endeavors. And I know we've got some Get Engaged alums here at the table, Zio and Caleb, who can attest to how fast the meeting goes or the year goes. And so we wish you the best in your future work and hope to maybe invite you back to this table at a time that may work for you.
So much.
So
I appreciate that.
excellent. So as Zio noted, this is a hybrid meeting being held both in person and in the board syndication room of Seattle City Hall. We have 3, 4, 6 commissioners joining us here in person, and the rest of you are on the call. Please note that we'll be using the chat function to be recognized to speak by the chair, either with questions you may have for our presenters after they're finished their presentation or comments. For those commissioners in the room, please do, if you have your laptop with you, please do join the chat. If you don't, please raise your hand or take your nameplate and flip it up, and I'll do my best to help Zio monitor the chat. In terms of public comment, we welcome public comment. We have 3 different ways to provide public comment: by joining us here in the Boards and Commissions room, by emailing me in advance of the meeting, and I will read the public comment, or for those members of the public who are either calling in or joining on the Teams platform to offer public comment via that way. I see we do have 1 member of the public joining us on the Teams platform, and so I'm just going to go put my glasses on, take a look and see if you would like to provide public comment. Please raise your hand in the Teams platform. And I'll just give you a couple seconds to do that in case that's something you'd like to do. Okay, and I'm not seeing any public comment to be provided, so we can skip the blurb around that we read out, that Zio reads out when we have public comment, and go immediately to our first and only agenda item.
Awesome. So we have a briefing on comprehensive plan implementation, anti-displacement strategies with Michael Hubner and Jonathan Morales from OPCD joining us. These are specifically strategies to implement the One Seattle comprehensive plan. We have an hour and 15 minutes for this agenda topic, and we ask that our presenters leave 20 to 25 minutes for commissioner questions and comment. And I do think that our folks are online. So cool, sweet. Michael and Jonathan, you have the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon. There are at least 6 commissioners in the boards and commissions room. Well, we're both upstairs. I'm feeling bad. We should have come down and joined you in person. I'm all for in-person meetings. I'm glad to see the commission getting back in the same room together. For the record, Michael, and especially with some new commissioners coming up on board. I'm Michael Hubner. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager in the Office of Planning and Community Development. Jonathan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jonathan Morales. I'm a Senior Planner in the Land Use Policy Team in the Office of Planning and Community Development.
And I was the project manager for the comprehensive plan update. As we go down the road toward implementation and future phases, bringing in new staff, new roles, new bodies of work. Jonathan has been working on our supplemental work to our environmental impact statement for the comprehensive plan, which is taking in very substantial new components of planning for growth in the city, which Jonathan will speak to today. Jonathan, are you running that deck? Are you sharing your screen? Let's see.
Are you able to see that?
Yep.
We are.
Yes.
All right.
So yeah, why don't we go to the overview slide? So thanks for having us to come to talk about anti-displacement and the comp plan work. There's a very specific angle that this presentation has on the anti-displacement questions in that, and what we're sharing with you today is a slide deck that we presented to City Council, the Select Committee on the Comprehensive Plan, maybe it was a week or 2 ago, that specifically is providing a description of how we are bringing an anti-displacement lens to the next phase of zoning legislation that Jonathan is working on and we'll spend most of our time talking about. What the mayor has talked about is the taller, denser, faster package of potential zoning changes that we would study in the supplemental EIS. And to spend some time, we spent some time with council reviewing just the topic of anti-displacement, how we addressed that in the comprehensive plan, at least at a high level, how we brought that analysis and that approach to the legislation that is currently at City Council, the Centers and Corridors zoning legislation. And then, and I'll turn it over to Jonathan to talk about the phase 3 zoning, but this next phase, and where our thinking is around how to approach displacement risk in the context of considering a whole new round of zoning changes across the city. We'll also finish by touching on the schedule for phase 3 specifically, and related to that, it's not on the outline here, but I know that there are some questions, and this actually has some bearing on the schedule, which is, what is the status of the various legal appeals to the comprehensive plan and or the EIS for the main comprehensive plan? So I actually have a little deck. When we're done with schedule, I want to share that out with you, and I think it'll help the commission track what's going on the legal front, and especially how that's impacting our timing, our schedule. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that I've shared with the commission before, but just to ground us, and it's actually a good touch point for talking about equity and anti-displacement. The comprehensive plan update itself is grounded on 4 key moves, or areas that are really driven by the city's values: housing and affordability, equity and opportunity, neighborhoods, community and neighborhoods, and climate and sustainability. That equity and opportunity focus was evident in the comp plan from its very inception. The very first event, the very first analysis we did for this update was a racial equity analysis of the last comprehensive plan, the prior one, Seattle 2035, and a convening of stakeholders from across the city to talk about that topic, to hear from folks who had been involved in that update, who were looking forward to the next update and hoping we would do more and do better to grow in a way that was equitable, especially around issues related to displacement. Next slide. Of course, the comprehensive plan has its growth strategy, which we've talked numerous times with the commission about. This provides a template, a higher level template for what then is subsequent zoning legislation. The growth strategy itself, and we won't be talking about this a lot today, but it's always worth noting that we see the growth strategy, which adds significant new capacity for housing and a more diverse array of housing options in more neighborhoods. And by doing that we believe that is an anti-displacement strategy in and of itself, because a lot of what's going on with displacement across the city are market pressures on communities that can't afford to pay the rent, afford to purchase a home, are experiencing many pressures that are making it hard for them to continue to live in their neighborhoods or in the city at all. This is a necessary step, is to provide sufficient capacity across the city and to open up new areas of the city that have been relatively low growth areas because our zoning has been quite restrictive historically. This plan does a lot of that. So it's a necessary and foundational step to address displacement, but it's not sufficient to address all of the aspects of displacement, and especially the housing and other activities and uses in the city that simply can't afford market prices, market rents. So that we have an array of other tools that we'll touch on that address the full span of households and others in the city. But it starts with the growth strategy. Next slide. Just to ground us in our understanding of displacement, that the pressure around displacement is best thought of as and pressures that cause people to leave their neighborhood, their homes, the city as a whole, involuntarily. It's not something they choose to do, but something they are forced to do for a number of different reasons. There's physical displacement, where they're actually their home or their place of business is they're evicted, it's acquired, it's demolished, redeveloped. Takes a variety of forms. They're actually forced to leave physically. There's economic displacement, which I touched on, which is just the cost of remaining is higher than folks can afford. There's commercial displacement, which I've kind of been weaving in a little bit here. It's not just about homes. It's also about places for small, locally owned businesses, especially businesses that provide goods and services to particular communities. And there's cultural displacement, which is thought of as integral communities become much less viable to remain because so many of the households and the businesses and the cultural anchors have had to leave. It doesn't make sense for a lot of folks to stay in their neighborhoods anymore. So that's cultural displacement, much broader. It's really the cumulative impact of all of the other forces. We try to address all of these types of displacement. Which was the next slide, Jonathan? It's the one about the measures, right? Yeah. So we use a lot of data to understand what's going on with displacement, to plan around our understanding of displacement pressures. We have our displacement risk index. It's a map the city has maintained for a little more than a decade. We update it periodically, especially with when the census is updated. It's an index. It draws from a variety of different data points, some of them demographic, economic, real estate, and also even including where we're making major public investments that can stimulate market activity or redevelopment that heightens displacement risk. So all of those are combined in an index, and what you see on the map are the red areas, or orange to red. It's a spectrum of colors. It's a heat map, if you will, of areas where there are a high number of vulnerable households and heightened pressures on households generally in terms of price or market pressure. So you can see some of the areas that have long been experienced displacement pressures, places like Rainier Beach, Beacon Hill, Southeast Seattle generally, the CID, Delridge, other location, High Point, other locations in West Seattle, a few Lake City and a few places in North Seattle. The University District lights up here that I take that one with a little bit of a grain of salt because that is skewed somewhat by the data that related to students at the U. But there are also households and folks living in the University District who experience acute displacement pressure as well. We also collect other data related to displacement, and we maintain it on a publicly available dashboard. These data are additive to what's in the map, and they provide more of a real time, if you will. We update it as soon as we get new data that tells us a little bit about what's going on the ground. Things like TREO, tenant relocation assistance, applications, foreclosures, things that indicate that there is displacement happening over time. It's not shown on the slide, but it's really important to note that this is not a rigid, data-driven, map-driven consideration of displacement risk in the city that we take. We also do two other important things. We look at historic and ongoing neighborhood change. We're very aware of the history of practices and policies that caused displacement in the past, like redlining, and we talk with community. We do a lot of anti-displacement work out of the office, and our understanding of how displacement is affecting different communities and neighborhoods is informed by talking to people in an ongoing way as well. Next slide. So in the spring of 2025, as part of the comp plan rollout of the update, final plan update documents, the OPCD, in partnership with the mayor's office, released an anti-displacement strategy document, which did a couple of things. Essentially, we felt it was important to take stock of all of the tools that the city did have, and there are more than 24 tools that are identified in the strategy that are existing strategies and approaches to mitigating displacement risk. They include, things like and we put them into categories, into buckets. So one is to plan, including that data and monitoring and coordinating with different departments who are taking on pieces of this work across the city. There's production of housing, not only market rate, but especially subsidized or affordable housing, which takes a variety of forms, everything from the housing levy to our Jumpstart funded housing and inclusionary tools like mandatory housing affordability. There are strategies to protect and preserve existing affordable housing. The tenant supports like rental assistance or like TREO that I mentioned, and homeowner supports like foreclosure prevention and other tools. And finally, the preservation of the housing itself, that is, the protect was about the people, the residents, current residents of the city. Preservation then is about the actual homes themselves. And Office of Housing has various tools that it uses for rental housing preservation and assistance to homeowners, like home repair assistance and other resources. So we took stock of all those tools. We've been collaborating with other departments to deliver them in a more efficient and accessible way. And that was how that piece rolled out last year as we were bringing the comp plan forward. As we're looking at this phase 3 zoning, we're taking a fresh look at displacement and anti-displacement efforts across the city. And it's an opportunity for us to identify new or better things the city can do going forward. So this is really a foundation for work going forward. Next slide. So briefly, I just want to touch on how did we bring questions around an analysis and also policy around anti-displacement with the legislation to implement the comprehensive plan in the form of zoning changes across the city. So your commission is very familiar with centers and corridors. This is the zoning that provides new housing capacity in our new neighborhood centers, along our frequent transit corridors, and in our new and expanded urban centers. Council passed by resolution an expectation that when we bring that kind of zoning legislation forward, that we also bring forward an analysis of how it intersects with our displacement risk in various neighborhoods, and how we are addressing anti-displacement along with that legislation. So we did that in the form of a memo that we brought to council last March. And it basically outlines the very same information I shared with you in the first part of this presentation, which is talked about the role of centers and corridors in increasing capacity for housing and housing options, especially in formerly exclusionary areas of the city. It talks about the opportunity to provide more affordable housing as MHA would be used in the newly upzoned areas. And it also pointed to that same toolbox that we have to address displacement risk citywide, and that could be employed in areas where the zoning changes are happening. Next slide. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. I think really the main thing we want to talk with you about today is, as we move forward and we're considering much broader zoning changes to implement the plan, share with you a little bit how we're thinking about anti-displacement in the context of those proposals, and get some of your perspective and ideas on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts as we're thinking about these things. Jonathan.
Thank you, Michael. So I think we're familiar with the mayor's announcement back in early April. I believe we presented back in May to the Planning Commission with sort of a high-level overview of what we're thinking to consider for phase 3. And so this presentation, the next subsequent slides, sort of like a follow-up to that. But just a reminder that in April, the mayor announced her intention to combine phase 3 and phase 4 of further comprehensive plan implementation and what she coined taller, denser, faster. So that's phase 3. And she laid out a set of guiding vision statements, sort of guiding the focus for these future zoning changes. So the first one is affordable and abundant housing. So addressing our housing affordability challenges by expanding housing supply. The importance of not waiting to deliver zoning changes. Doing things like implementing HB 1491, which is not required until 2029, but looking into ways to implement that sooner than the deadline. The importance of establishing thriving, complete neighborhoods. So increasing housing availability near transit and community amenities. So these are like parks, schools, libraries, things that make a community a community. And then environmental justice. So adding additional housing supply in areas that are away from polluted streets. Just ensuring that there's equitable distribution of housing options that are along these quieter streets. So for phase 3, we'll need to do an SEIS, which is a supplement to the comprehensive plan EIS. And so we will look into studying potential zoning changes in several areas. Chief among them is our growth centers that's established in the growth strategy. So those are existing centers like our regional centers, urban centers, and neighborhood centers. We're also looking to identify potential zoning changes in new or expanded neighborhood centers that were proposed in council resolution to the comprehensive plan. And so there's a set of 9 new neighborhood centers and then 6 existing neighborhood centers proposed for expansions. So we'll be looking at those. And then back in our EIS scoping process, there were some areas that were highlighted as potential neighborhood centers. And so we are looking into additional opportunities to identify new neighborhood centers. And then some potential expansions related to HB 1491 and our frequent transit routes. A key theme, a new theme that we're looking into is additional housing supply near parks and schools. So the map on the right shows our public space parks. And this is taken from our outside citywide initiative, which is a public space inventory that's housed out of the OPCD. And I believe that's from 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So it provides a list of tiers of parks. So we will be focusing on tier 1 through 3 parks. So that's like, example of tier 1 park is Discovery Park. A tier 2 park is like Volunteer Park. And a tier 3, I believe, is like Cal Anderson Park. And then we're also looking at public schools. And so this just provides a base map with those parks and open spaces highlighted in the schools. We're also looking into station areas. So these are the rail station areas and BRT station areas to implement the TOD bill or HB 1491. And lastly, frequent transit corridors. So looking at additional opportunities to expand housing off of these frequent transit corridors within distance of stops. So following the mayor's announcement in April, we quickly convened a set of stakeholder convenings between April and June. So the first one was held April 22nd, and this one was specific to stakeholders doing work around urbanism, land use, and housing. June 4th, we hosted one specific to environment, sustainability, and trees. And then on June 16th, we held one on anti-displacement and equity. So these next few slides, I sort of going to synthesize what we've heard in those convenings, and especially specific to the anti-displacement convening. So as we move forward in our analysis in the SAS, One of the key ways that we can address displacement, in our view, is through zoning choices. So keeping zoning increases low or not up zoning in areas of high displacement risk. So that's one option we can take to sort of mitigate potential displacement. Other options are laying out a set of tools and strategies, or otherwise known as mitigation measures. So these are things like investments and programs, such as the Equitable Development Initiative or support for legacy homeowners to remain in their homes. So these are some of the ways that we can address displacement. And as we go through the analysis, we'll begin to identify what are their displacement risk and how will we approach through this from policy tools and actions.
Hey, Jonathan, before you leave this slide, can I say a couple of quick things?
Sure.
Yeah, because this is a really important slide to introduce this part of the presentation. First, I want to make sure that the commission understands that the supplemental EIS itself will analyze displacement as an impact. We did so in our EIS for the comp plan, so that's something you can look forward to in the environmental analysis. And then the mitigation measures addressed through that process is a nice platform for us to think about not only what the tools we have now, but are there other options, non-zoning options as anti-displacement tools that we may want to consider. So that supplemental EIS is a good framework for analyzing this issue and looking at the array of potential tools. And it's on the zoning part here, what we're doing here, I want to make clear that what we are proposing to do is to incorporate a zoning approach to anti-displacement in one of the alternatives in the supplemental EIS. And the reason there is there are a variety of things that we need to consider in terms of how zoning relates to displacement risk. One of the things that we tried to do with centers and corridors, for example, is make sure we're providing housing supply and new housing supply in all neighborhoods. And at the same time, we've also heard community voices with concern that if we upzoned areas, it would increase displacement at a neighborhood scale. There's a balance in there. We do feel that there's housing supplies needed in all neighborhoods. And we do recognize that redevelopment and displacement risk pressures do happen, often accompanied when upzoning occurs. That can occur. And the goal of the supplemental EIS is to provide an array of choices, a menu of going lighter here, and in another alternative, full up zones, treat all areas the same. What we're doing here is providing options to bring to the public. We can analyze each of them in a SEPA analysis. We're not at the point of proposing a particular approach to zoning in any of the high-risk displacement neighborhoods, but rather to think about how can we study options in the EIS that tell us something about which way the city should go. So if any question, hopefully we can get into that a little bit with the Q&A. I just wanted to make sure you understood what we're talking about here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for providing that clarity. All right, so this slide sort of summarizes the key general themes that we've heard across 3 convenings. So we've heard from a variety of different community organizations and individuals. So first there's broad support for a wide range of housing types. The importance of pairing strong anti-displacement protections with any increase in density. Broad support for community-led land acquisition opportunities. Tailoring zoning approaches based on a particular neighborhood's needs. So doing the tailored place-based approach. Support for higher density and low displacement risk areas with higher opportunities. Growth through density should be paired with infrastructure improvements. So that's things like your public utilities, tree canopy protection, urban heat island mitigation, healthy neighborhood standards. These all came up, especially at our June 4th environment convening. And then a common theme across was just the idea of improving our city process, so like permitting and working interdepartmentally with different departments. So now this slide is summarizing our zoning themes that we heard at our June 16th convening. So that's the anti-displacement convening. So there was interest in equitable distribution of density, so focusing zoning in areas with low displacement risk and high opportunity. Again, on limiting zoning changes in areas of high displacement risk. The importance of putting out there a balanced package of changes that will support community needs. So with the understanding that low density alone does not prevent displacement and actually may limit community-led options for development. So providing that range of alternatives that as we get to our zoning legislation process, council could choose. So providing anti-displacement protections with up zones and at-risk areas. Zoning for community-led development, so allowing for building types that are feasible to community-based developers and allowing flexibility in type of housing and removing barriers for faith-based and cultural organizations who are doing housing development. Affordability in zoning, so establishing performance-based approaches, incentives, and requirements for affordable housing that's tied to this added zoning capacity. Utilizing tools like overlays to achieve equitable development outcomes. Again, city process reform. And then mandatory housing affordability. So as we're in this, conversation about MHA, if the city updates MHA requirements, seek to preserve overall funding levels for affordable housing and not increase displacement pressures. So that's just some of the zoning themes. And then in terms of non-zoning themes, again, the interest in land acquisition and land banking as different policy tools to support community-led and controlled development. Legacy homeowner support and stabilization. So supporting legacy homeowners and getting access to repair assistance and additional funding and tax relief. Ensuring that there's a stable capital stack and pre-development support for housing development and things like operation support and acquisition funding. Tenant protections and tenant rights. So support for right to return, community preference, relocation assistance. Let's see. And then cultural and commercial stabilization and support for community developers. So supporting cultural organizations and community anchors from displacement risk and providing technical assistance, funding, pre-development support. Environmental justice, again, supporting efforts to protect tree canopy, reduce pollution and health impacts. And lastly, just preserving and enhancing the Equitable Development Initiative out of OPCD, with the understanding that this is one of the key ways right now that we're addressing displacement risk. So this last slide is sort of an overview of our draft timeline for phase 3. So this is an approximate schedule that's based on our best case scenario. And as you see here on the dotted gray line with the call out, if we're able to get to a draft SCIS by Q1, Q2 of 2027, this assumes that our comp plan appeal process related to phase 2 are complete. And so Michael will be going into that in more detail about our appeals. But currently, as this timeline is written, we're looking at a draft SCIS being released with proposed zoning alternative maps that will be available for public comment around early Q2 2027. And we're also looking to do a fall engagement process. So that's for the September, October update and scope overview.
Of this year.
Of this year, yes, 2026.
Yes.
Some more details will be announced in the next few weeks, but that's just some additional ways that we're continuing the conversation and ensuring that there's a lot of opportunity for engaging folks. And that's all I have. Michael, do you want to get into your slides or should we take questions?
I'm thinking maybe, Vanessa, I defer to you, but maybe having a discussion and answer any questions about the displacement topic and the substance of what we covered so far. And maybe at the end, go back and refresh on the schedule looking forward, and I can talk about the appeals then.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michaela.
You were typing for me.
I was just gonna.
Okay. Hi, thank you for the presentation. I remain very interested in how the Planning Commission can help shape, inform, and uplift priorities that are coming from communities who are at high risk of displacement. Just wanted to commend the mayor and you all for intentionally having a convening where they were invited to the table. I was at the April Urbanist convening that you had mentioned for the Tolerance or Faster. And it certainly felt like those folks had to sort of work to get a seat at that table. And so I just appreciate that you had that special conversation with them. And zoning is a great tool for actually addressing displacement by creating more housing supply. So Michael, I also really appreciate you acknowledging that it's a real fine balance between how we increase capacity, which certainly does increase displacement. It does actually result in displacement of people, but also viewing capacity as a means for over time, providing more housing choice and supply for folks in Seattle. I really liked the slide and the content that was around the non-zoning themes that came out of that conversation. But thus far, I viewed the taller, denser, faster work as primarily a zoning exercise. And so can you help me, how will this show up in the phases 2 and 3 that are ahead of council related to the comprehensive plan? Will any of these ideas have an avenue to advance in the taller, denser, faster work or phase 2, whatever that's called?
Yes, it does get confusing with all our phases. Phase 2 is that kind of, so let's yeah, I mean that is what they'll be voting, we hope, knock on wood, on as soon as our SEPA appeal is resolved in early 2027. But I mean, what we're talking about today, phase 3 is really where we're doing most of our work going forward, before we send anything to council. I think first it starts with what I was emphasizing on one of those, I think, couple of slides earlier than this, around through the supplemental EIS process, identifying a really robust array of mitigation measures to identify and call out in that exercise. I know that's just the EIS, and it doesn't have to do everything you identify as a mitigation measure, or may not even be able to, at least right away. But it's a nice structure for us to look at, or the array of tools. So this, what we're hearing from community can help inform that. Like if there are things here that we're not doing or not doing as well as maybe we could, it's good information. And I think that it's fair to say that while it wouldn't be part of the proposal per se, and what we can do in the proposal that is studied, the alternatives, is the zoning approach, is the prior slide just before this, the zoning approaches, right? Because it's a zoning proposal, but we're also aware there are non-zoning tools and levers. So I think that it's fair to say that this mayor is very interested in continuing that conversation with communities around what can the city do? What can the city do better or more of? How can we partner with community? I think you can expect to see more of that going forward. I can't speak to exactly what that might look like, but the fact that we are doing this work around upzoning in some pretty broad areas of the city, I think is a really great opportunity for us to have deeper conversations. So.
Great. And then my other two comments would be when evaluating displacement in the SCIS, make sure that you're keeping that broad lens of displacement. It's not just residential displacement, but it's commercial and cultural as well. And then my other comment is when we reviewed, and this was a few years ago now, one of the Sound Transit draft EISs, we spent our time as a commission looking at the Chinatown International District. And it was really difficult. There was a separate document that the city had, or somebody had prepared, that had a kind of an equity analysis that accompanied the EIS. Looking at the EIS itself to understand the impacts of commercial displacement in the CID. And of course, you know, the ground floor commercial retail space in that neighborhood is part of the neighborhood's cultural identity. And so when evaluating options for where the station should go within the neighborhood, it felt like really important information to have in order to understand and weigh options. And we just weren't seeing that all of that information within the document. And so I did hear you say the intention is to put that in the EIS this time for this one. Did I understand that
I don't
intent
want to
correctly?
I don't want to overstate it, and I don't want to speak entirely. I mean, Jonathan, please chime in if you would. But I just know that we did an anti-displacement. We did a displacement risk analysis as part of the FEIS for the comp plan, and we intend to continue that approach with the supplemental, as well as putting some new thought into the mitigation measures. So that's not the same as an equity analysis that may be more comprehensive. So your point is well taken that maybe we should, what I'm hearing is it might be a good idea. It would be a good idea for us to do something broader.
Yeah, and if you want us to review some things you're thinking about when you're scoping that out, or you want to return back to these community groups that you engaged in June, maybe thinking through like what kind of information would you like us to include in the SCIS that would help you assess and weigh these different options. Okay, thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, hi. I think there's probably a fair number of people in the city who say, yeah, density is good, it's important for housing, just not my neighborhood. So what's the best way to respond to that? Particularly some of the more privileged groups might be louder on saying not my neighborhood. I'm not sure if that's you and your group or city council has to respond to that, but what's the best way to handle that?
I'm not sure. What's the best way to respond to people who say they don't like increasing density? Is that the question?
Yeah, you'll probably get, formal protests from individual neighborhood groups who, don't want the upzoning in their neighborhood. Do you say no to all of them? Do you somehow allow some of them to get changed? How do you keep it equitable, given that some of the groups are going to be louder than others saying not my neighborhood?
Well, I'll speak from the comprehensive plan update experience. I mean, first of all, which we certainly did hear a lot of, I think it's totally fair. I mean, quite frankly, if I go and talk to a neighborhood-based group, folks are going to come to the table and talk about their own neighborhood, and that's fine and fair, and I would expect that. The value of doing a comprehensive plan that's citywide is you can bring a perspective that is citywide, that's more the collective of neighborhoods across the city, and talk about the values and data and challenges the city faces, like around housing affordability and the history of exclusion that cuts across many different neighborhoods, and the impact of concentrated redevelopment on some neighborhoods that's caused displacement. A lot of factors really experienced by multiple neighborhoods, and to tell that story, which is a citywide story, and to just be really, I mean, I just speak personally, is just be really clear about the work we've done to identify the challenges and problems, the responsibility for all neighborhoods that we've articulated up front, about that every neighborhood has a role to play, and that here are the problems we were trying to solve with this plan. And it doesn't mean that people are always going to agree that if with the vision for their own neighborhood, but I think it does help to put that neighborhood perspective, which sometimes can be quite, not as showing a lot as much awareness or addressing the bigger problems, puts it into context. I will say that I was pleasantly surprised through the comprehensive plan update, even though, sure, there are a lot of people, there are people who are very unhappy with the comp plan. Land use is always hard. Change is hard. But I was pleasantly surprised how many conversations I've had with people started with something like, I know we can't keep doing what we've been doing. The housing situation is just not working, for my kids, for my neighbor, and even people who were unhappy brought that as a starting point of the conversation. And I really appreciated that. And I think that led to better conversations at a neighborhood level.
Okay. Thank you.
Haley?
Hi. I thank you so much for presenting on this. I'm always so impressed by the amount of data that you all collect, especially with the risk indicators. And then it's great to see more about what's going to happen in phase 3. I think that's really exciting. Michael, I feel like I'm coming at you from all sides, because I think there was an email in your inbox from my work email about this today as well. But I work for Seattle Public Schools, and
that's right, Haley.
Yeah, I'm like, you can't escape me. Here I am again. And so it was really fascinating to see the supplemental EIS that specifically looks at public spaces like parks and schools. And I just was wondering if there are, I'm not quite sure how much of this needs to be in the official EIS, but just thinking about, obviously upzoning broadly is good for family-sized housing. And when I think about family-sized housing, I'm thinking 2 bedrooms or more. But do you all, knowing that there's this EIS specifically focused, it's seemingly on families, if it's kind of looking at housing near schools, do you all have any plan for incentivizing family-sized housing, or will that kind of follow how initial rounds of the EIS went? Just thinking about any additional tools you all are thinking about to incentivize different sized housing.
Jonathan, you want to field that one?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's definitely a topic that we're thinking about, and we don't have a formal approach to how we're going to address specifically incentivizing family-sized housing, but through the variety of different zoning options that we're considering, we are looking into the apartment scale, buildings, and ensuring that there's upwards of 2 and 3 beds. I would say. Anything else to add to that, Michael?
Well, so there's a couple of things that we do know. The council did, for the new neighborhood residential zoning code that brought us into compliance with House Bill 1110, the middle housing bill last year. That was a discussion that happened at council around family-sized housing in your schools, and there was an incentive amended into that legislation to provide a floor area, a bonus for stacked flats that had larger units. That's an example of a zoning tool that can incentivize larger units. That's number one. We could potentially look at different levers we could look at that could be built into one of the alternatives around incentives for family-sized units, even as we're upzoning, that would also include market rate housing. So it's not, you're not just getting family-sized units, but you're trying to tilt the scale toward more family-sized units around schools. That's number one. Number two is under the new statute, House Bill 1491, there's a required adoption of a family-sized unit bonus. And it's complicated, but it's related to FAR as well as an exemption from an FAR cap for family-sized units near transit stations. I know that's not the same as near school, but sometimes schools are near transit stations, and it does potentially provide more family housing in those developments in the city, at least. So that's another thing we will be studying because it's part of that legislation we have to adopt. And we've been hearing a lot on this topic about what can we do to specifically incentivize family-sized larger units. We've been receiving even some comments in writing already from folks who are very active on these ideas. So we're hearing that, and in the scope of what we're studying won't just be zoning map A, zoning map B, but also a list of development standards or development regulation options that we're also will consider as part of the SEPA analysis, and an incentive for family-sized units could be a part of that list.
Great, thanks so much.
Yes, I believe the city just changed their MFT program. They might not be like on version 7 or something, and that MFT program also has an incentive for family-sized units. Although, the tools that we have in the toolkit are limited, and we all know that they're not yielding enough size units. So it's a really important question to ask. It was a area of focus for the commission back in the early aughts or late aughts. So it's something we talk about on occasion. And so just Haley, I really appreciate you asking that question. Michael, anything that we can ever do to help uplift and push the city to continue to think about how we create a city for households of all sizes. Let us know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing I'll throw in there is the stack flats. So we talked a lot about that with the NR zones. So it's a housing type that is perhaps more likely to produce more family-friendly units. We're always looking for ideas about how we can incentivize that, even under existing NR zoning, which allows stack flats up to really four stories. So really small apartment building.
I'll just read my own comment into the record, which is just that if there's any commissioners that don't comment as frequently but might have thoughts on displacement, we'd love to get you in the queue when we get to schedule things. And I'll pass it on to Dylan G.
Michael, Jonathan, thanks for the presentation. It's always great to get these updates. Just regarding the family size units, I mean, you guys know this, you guys hear this, but just to kind of hit the point home, developers are often avoid family-sized units because of financial incentives of doing smaller units. But we'll just say there was work that was done to incentivize family-sized units in high-rises, among many other places. And just an anecdote, my experience, developer chose to build 10 family-sized units because they got an extra level. And they built, a floor, a 3-bedroom unit because they had an extra level. It worked. It made sense. Completely made sense. So that sort of like direct incentive of increasing height and for multifamily projects to get, it's 10 out of 300 units. We need more than that. But 10 units is still a lot of family-sized units. And so I would just say continue to work on those incentives. They work. So I would be happy to see more of those going in, adding more additive incentives instead of kind of forcing developers to build this as part of just a standard set of rules. Other quick question on neighborhood centers, just like a note. It seemed like I was surprised to see 16 more studied in this in your deck. And just curious, I know there were roughly 9 that were kind of docketed by the council last year for further study. And so, but there's an additional, roughly 7 or so. I'm curious where that, I guess, where those came from. What was the thinking behind that? Who were kind of the stakeholders that contributed to developing these different areas for further neighborhood center study? And I know these are just what could be as part of the wide scope of an EIS, but just curious to know a little bit more about how you guys got to 16 more.
I want to turn to Jonathan on that, but Dylan, why am I not surprised you counted the circles on the map?
I think compared to my map.
No, it's good. That's an illustrative map, so I would not count things on the map at this point. But Jonathan, you can speak to how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah, and you are referring to those circles, right?
Yeah, the purplish dash circles.
Okay,
Makes
yes. Yeah, I'm sure there's, so these are what is currently existing like in our in our GIS in terms of what was considered for studying the EIS scoping process. Again, this is a very draft map, so there's probably room to explore additional areas, and that is part of the process as we go through the analysis, is sort of identifying other potential areas for new neighborhood centers. But at the base, we're looking at the existing neighborhood centers, and then the council resolution, which called for 9 new neighborhood centers and 6 of the existing to expand. And then these are just some other potential areas that we are calling out in our map. But as we move forward, I'm sure there'll be some additional areas.
Yeah, it's really just an initial sketch. I mean, we would be looking at many of the same kinds of factors that we looked at in identifying the original neighborhood centers, other mix of uses, transit access, proximity to amenities and schools, parks, and so forth. Ideas we've heard from comment and probably including yourself or the commission during the comp plan update. And really what you'll see among the 2 alternatives very likely is one alternative that looks at the ones the council asked us to add, and one alternative that does that plus some additional ones. And we're still going through a process of identifying exactly which those would be. And the whole goal is to just provide the council and the mayor with a really robust menu to choose from that's studied under SEPA. And so we don't hit restrictions in adding or moving neighborhood centers when it comes to the legislative process. So it could be 50 or so, who knows, but there's not a precise number right now.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. I think 50 is probably a pretty good number. Thanks.
It's for study. It's not a proposal.
I know.
We're just studying.
50 centers and half a mile transit. TJ?
Yeah, Michael and Jonathan, first off, thank you for the really, really helpful presentation. Being new to the commission, this is really valuable information. For me, especially learning a little bit more about displacement and some of the policies that we can do in response to it or in anticipation of it. I understand that when we talk about policy responses, we're talking about local responses that the city has within its purview. But I also think of the housing market itself as a regional market where displacement pressures in Seattle are going to have some spillover effects in Shoreline, Renton, Bellevue, neighboring cities. And when I think about actions that the city takes in response to displacement, I see other cities having an incentive to perhaps not implement equivalent displacement, anti-displacement strategies, thinking that if the city is going to address this, then let them, because that will avoid spillover effects within our jurisdictions and lift some of the burden for us to have to take equivalent responses. So first off, is that the case? Like, do you see that being the case that there are some spillover effects across jurisdictions? If so, what exactly is some of the coordination that the city does or that we can do with other jurisdictions to perhaps harmonize some of our approach to anti-displacement strategies?
Quickly, I'm also cognizant of time here, but there's actually a pretty quick, at least high level answer to that, which is in recent years, there's been a lot more put in place at the regional level through the Puget Sound Regional Council, through its Vision 2050 and the different things that are put in place to implement Vision 2050 requirements for cities. And at the state level, under the Growth Management Act, that actually require a more common, at least basic level of planning for around anti-displacement and planning for housing generally. So I think we're in a much better place to expect that other cities are doing good work. It's always going to be the case that cities are going to, do different things and have different levels of effort and different levels of resources, and they're in a very different place economically too, around their real estate and vulnerable populations. So, it's not perfect, but I feel like we're in a better position with the role the state has in requiring anti-displacement approaches, or at least policies, through the Growth Management Act and Puget Sound Regional Council. For example, other cities that have regional centers, they have to adopt and address displacement risk in planning for their centers. There are other requirements like that that affect both Seattle and other cities equally.
Michael, that's really helpful. I heard that there's action taken at the state level, there's action taken by PSRC. Is there a specific role though for the city, is what I'm asking?
Well, we are very active in participating at both levels and especially within the region. We're very active at the Puget Sound Regional Council in having those conversations at the elected level, at the staff level. Housing and equity are major themes that get discussed at those forums. I can tell you. I'm not trying to, I can't fully represent what's going on at the regional level. We are mainly focused on what we're doing within the city and then participating in, what is done regionally to coordinate and uplift cities across the region to be coordinated, and also everybody be stepping up and taking a share of the responsibility to address our needs. So that's what we try to do every day.
Thank you.
Margaret.
Great, thank you so much. And I just have a quick question about the stakeholder engagement that's mentioned in the slides. I'm particularly curious which stakeholder groups were engaged with for the anti-displacement and equity meeting on June 16th. If there were any groups that helped inform on the issue of cultural displacement in particular.
Well, sorry, can you repeat the type of displacement? Did you say cultural?
Yeah, in particular, if there are any groups that helped inform on the cultural displacement at that June 16th meeting.
Yes, so we did have a lot of different representatives from different cultural organizations, primarily from the central area and the CID. So we had some organizations that were invited and weighed in on the topics. So that feedback is captured in our analysis of stakeholder feedback.
The only thing I'll add to that, it's worth noting that the Equitable Development Initiative is housed in OPCD. One great resource we have is working with our colleagues and with the communities, hearing from the voices from the EDI board and the communities that participate in that program. I think there's a lot of focus on cultural displacement in that work. So, convening is one way of hearing from community, but we also are getting information and, plugging into that, that part of the problem through the work that we do through EDI and the people that are involved.
Michael, this is Vanessa. Are you able to stay about 5 minutes extra so that we have
Yes.
time for you to go through the appeals? So I think
Yes.
maybe I don't want to ask you to stay longer, but I am going to ask you to stay a little longer. Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe move to those slides.
Yeah. I think my question is maybe a good tee up to that, which is just that HB 1491's implementation is by 2029, and given the speed at which the comp plan has gone, do we think that the SCIS is really going to cover getting ahead of that requirement, or are we planning to have a alternate plan for?
I can touch on that. I mean, let's get Jonathan. Could you run the deck about the appeals? Do you mind doing that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'll say up front is, as Jonathan highlighted, we're getting on this early. We're not waiting to do 1491. So we're starting earlier. So that'll help. There's some cushion, if you will, in the schedule to get. But also important is the legislation the city council just adopted limiting administrative appeals. So there are two kinds. So as I walk through what's under appeal right now, we'll actually touch on both kinds. There are pre-adoption appeals and there are post-adoption appeals. A pre-adoption appeal, the administrative appeal of our EIS, prevented city council from continuing to consider the centers and corridors legislation, for example. So it has caused a delay. That path to appealing the supplemental EIS would now be closed. Doesn't mean that the EIS couldn't be appealed. It just couldn't be appealed in that way that would prevent council action. So that'll help just on its face, that kind of delay. Appeals can cause delays even so, and it's just a fact of, and what we're going to try to do is do as strong of an EIS process as we possibly can, and work with the community and to incorporate their ideas, and hopefully, we'll have a very strong proposal that, and it'll be mitigated that way. But let me tell you the story of where we are right now. So there are 3 appeals actually in play right now. One is a SEPA appeal of the comp plan final EIS. One is a GMA appeal of the comp plan, the EIS, and zoning legislation, specifically the phase 1 legislation on neighborhood residential. And then there's a SEPA appeal. It's just kind of tangentially related to the comp plan, but also gets kind of confused in the mix of different legal actions out there. Our sub-area plan for the Duwamish Manufacturing Industrial Center, the addendum to the EIS, it was actually addendum to the Industrial and Maritime EIS, was also appealed. That plan is going to get adopted into the comp plan eventually, but it has delayed its adoption because it's a SEPA appeal. So I'm going to talk about all 3. Why don't we go to the next slide. So just going to give you the high points here. So the SEPA appeal of the EIS. This is the one that's been the most in the news. The appellants are Friends of Ravenna Cowan, and then Jennifer Godfrey, who is associated with several groups that work on protections for endangered orcas. It's sometimes called the Orca Appeal, but that's not the only issue that's at play in the appeal. There's one of them. It was dismissed originally at the hearing examiner back in 2025. And then this was what got the press coverage more recently is even though the Superior Court agreed with the hearing examiner on the dismissal, a further appeal to a Court of Appeals reversed the Superior Court and so sent the appeal back to Superior Court. It is very possible or likely that the Superior Court will send the case back to the hearing examiner. But we don't know until we know, and we haven't heard from the Superior Court yet. So it's sitting at Superior Court, having been sent back from Court of Appeals. And the reason it had been dismissed originally by the hearing examiner had to do with new state law, which the hearing examiner understood exempted a comp plan EIS from such an appeal. I'll spare you the legal details, and I don't want to pretend to be a lawyer, but just know that the Court of Appeals didn't agree with the reasoning of the hearing examiner. What's at issue in this appeal? Just the substance, because right now, all of the legal action has been on procedure. Nothing has been heard on the substance. If it goes back to the hearing examiner and the hearing examiner takes it up, what's at issue is the adequacy of the EIS regarding impacts on endangered orcas, impacts on historic districts, and also some questions about, did we study the right level of growth and housing development in the EIS? Next slide. So we also have been appealed to under the Growth Management Act, and that appeal is heard at the Growth Management Hearings Board. That's a post-adoption appeal. So once the comp plan was adopted, there's 60 days during which someone can appeal that action to the hearings board. And we did receive an appeal from some of the same appellants, Jennifer Godfrey, but others appealing on some different issues. Those appeals were consolidated into one case. It was heard on July 23rd, and we expect a decision by December 9th. It almost surely will be on December 9th because that's just what the board does. They tend to wait until the very end, but it could come earlier. You never know. Very similar set of issues here, but some new ones. Each case has a unique set of grounds for the appeal. This one also relates to assertions that we didn't study impacts on orcas, particularly from stormwater and loss of tree canopy. Also some questioning of did we study the right number of housing units? There are questions around the compliance with the Growth Management Act. So questioning the plan itself with regard to how we analyzed and planned for water service under our capital facilities. And also some questions raised about the housing element and specifically disparate impacts analysis, specifically related to what appellants feel are impacts related to MHA. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds on all that. I just want to give you a sense of the flavor of what issues have been brought up in the context of this appeal. And we await a decision in September. And the last slide is, so this is really tangential, but in case you're tracking these things, also, this is again back to a SEPA appeal. As we were bringing the Duwamish MIC sub-area plan to council for adoption, the addendum to the EIS that was prepared for the industrial maritime strategy that was several years prior to the comp plan was appealed, and I won't get into the details of where it stands legally right now. Just know it is at the hearing examiner, or is scheduled to go to the hearing examiner for a hearing in November. And basically what is at issue here are disagreements about what the plan says about prohibiting housing in the stadium area overlay district. I just leave it at that. That's what I got to share on the appeals. I hope that helps everybody who's trying to follow along at home on the crooked path we're taking through the legal system related to our planning and the environmental analysis.
Vanessa has a question.
Michael, thank you so much for going through this. This is like the third time I've heard it, and I think it's finally sinking in. So the third appeal that you talked about, which is appealing the addendum to the Maritime Industrial EIS that was done before the comp plan, does that appeal have any impact on the timing of the centers and corridors legislation by the city council?
Okay. No, good question. Yeah, yes. What does each appeal impact? So working backwards from the end, that appeal only impacts the adoption of the MIC sub-area plan for the Duwamish. So that appeal will have to be resolved before the council can adopt, and that becomes part of the comp plan. The MIC plan gets adopted in the comp plan. The SEPA appeal on the first SEPA appeal, the one that's on the comp plan EIS, that needs to be resolved for the council to take action on centers and corridors. That's my understanding. Even though there was the recent legislation by the council to remove that appeal path, but I also heard council members talk about, they expect that appeal will proceed before they take up centers and corridors. So I expect that appeal first, then centers and corridors adoption is what we're expecting.
The GMA appeal?
It doesn't prevent, that happens after council has acted. So what's appealed is things the council has already voted on. So what we may hear, if we had an adverse decision from the hearings board, we would have some additional work to do. We may be asked to do additional environmental analysis. We may be asked to amend the plan to add some information. There is a period of time during which we would be required to do that work. And if that were to happen, we would do the work and we would bring the city into compliance. I'm cautiously hopeful that we won't be in that situation, but yeah, that's the way the system works.
That appeal is holding the centers and corridors piece.
It is not.
aside.
No, to be really clear, that appeal has nothing to do with centers and corridors directly. And since it's a post and it's almost academic actually, because we have the other SEPA appeal, which is on a longer time frame. We're not expecting the SEPA appeal that is holding up centers and corridors to be resolved until the end of this year or into early next year. Although I don't have a calendar, I'm just guessing. We're going to get the decision from the hearings board on September 9th. Way ahead of that. So we should be able to resolve any issues that come out of that well before the other appeal gets. So it will not have a direct impact. It's all going to play out on a shorter time frame.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Michael.
And again, I am not an attorney. I'm not pretend just to my understanding from, I'm going to be really careful about how I talk about all of these. And we don't know until we see actual content of decisions and rulings. And there's a lot that we don't know. We don't have a hearings board decision. We haven't heard from Superior Court. We haven't heard from the hearing examiner on the status of next steps on a variety of fronts. So just giving a flavor of kind of where we are right now, and going forward.
Does anybody else have any additional questions for? Done.
Just a quick clarification. So the third one, the SEPA appeal for the Duwamish area, that relates back to the housing debate that happened back and forth about whether housing could happen in the stadium district. Is that related to that?
Yes.
Is this,
It's very narrowly on that issue. It is only about that issue. Yes.
okay, that makes sense. Could you put back up just the detail on number one again? On that deck, that slide.
Jonathan, you still there?
Yes, give me 1 second. Let's see if
That's the SEPA appeal with the compliment.
And this one is so hard to get people to understand because it's really been a procedural debate and really the substance has not been heard at all on this appeal. So it's been very convoluted. So
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for explaining that.
yes.
All right. Well, thanks for staying a little late. Just to run
No
through
problem.
questions. Really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
your
us.
time.
Thanks so much, Michael and Jonathan. Thank you.
If you have any follow-up questions or comments you want to send our way, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you.
Take care.
In our remaining time, I think Vanessa's staff want to talk through some updates on the commission's independent work.
Yes.
So I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you. And I'm so glad that so many commissioners are here because different people have been involved at different points in the process. So 6 weeks ago, or more or less, we decided as part of our independent work that we would focus on making a case for added residential density off corridors, frequent transit corridors, and providing images that could show how that added density on the quieter streets would actually make those streets more livable, would have public health impacts, and we had the idea of, I think it was Dylan's idea, to really use the Stay Healthy Streets program that SDOT launched in the middle of the pandemic as a model to show that it can be done, that the city does have there's precedent for creating safer, healthier streets for pedestrians, for bikes, for people rolling, for people not in cars. So we were on that track. We were making some headway. And it then came to my attention, the schedule that Michael just spoke to, and the fact so greater residential density off the corridors, that would be addressed through, and we knew this, through phase 3, otherwise known as taller, denser, faster. That legislation, because of the appeals that Michael just spoke to and the pause on consideration of the centers and corridors legislation, council won't be seeing the taller, denser, faster legislation until the earliest would be beginning of 2028. So it made us question, do we really want to be putting an effort into primarily a piece of work that would help inform council as well as their constituents of what this greater residential density off corridors could look like when that isn't even going to be considered by council until after the SEIS, which isn't coming out until the middle of next year and wouldn't be considered by council until the beginning of 2028. Then, just this morning, I had a conversation with a couple of OPCD staff, including Michael, and said, we're kind of shifting to making a case to council for why the centers and corridors legislation should be adopted as is, which they will be taking up as soon as these appeals, those two appeals, the main one, number one appeal is resolved. And Michael said, well, let me think on it, but I don't think it has to be an either or. I don't think you have to not talk about phase 3, especially since OBCD is going to be doing some outreach, which Michael referenced or Jonathan referenced in October, early October, mid-October, on letting people know what the scope of the SCIS will be and very high level conversations around taller, denser, faster, AKA phase 3. So as I just had that conversation this morning, my thought, which is one of the reasons why we're going to proceed with our second August full commission meeting, which is 2 weeks from today, is to use that time as a working session to continue to hone the scope of what it is we want to be putting out there sometime this fall, winter, early next year, as council takes up the centers and corridors legislation. To that end, we're also going to be canceling next week's executive committee so as to give Olivia, John, and I some time to put together some options for you all to consider at the August 27th full commission meeting. So I completely understand there will probably be questions, especially as different people have been involved in different conversations. But I think it's worth taking just two extra weeks for staff to flesh out, and we welcome any ideas, to flesh out some options for you all to discuss at the end of August of which direction do you want to go in. In addition to that, I am hoping to be scheduling some one-on-ones with council members, starting with the members of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee for the first half of September. They go on, they take the second half of August off. And that the purpose of those meetings would be, hi, we're the Planning Commission. You may not be aware of us, but this is who we are. This is our membership. These are the lived life experiences and professions and geographic diversity that's represented on the commission. Here's some of the work that we've done. We've been very involved the last couple of years in the comprehensive plan, in the review of the iterations of the comprehensive plan and associated legislation. And we hope to be coming back to you soon after budget with our thoughts on the subsequent phases of implementation of the comp plan. And that way we won't be asking for, and this was something that CEO and Nick had recommended when I met with them after you all voted for them to be co-chairs. Like it makes sense to try again to reach out to council and at least establish a baseline relationship so that when we do have some independent work to share with them, we're also not taking up they already know a little bit about us, as opposed to, you may not be aware of us, but we have some ideas for you. And they're like, who are you? We don't know who you are. So, so that's my update as of today at 4:45.
I'll just add like a little bit of color from the last couple of exec meetings and then also from Nick and I. One of the things that we talked about was like the things that council members are hearing about right now and will be hearing about from constituents are likely the things that it is in the interest of the commission to try and be able to speak to or brief electeds on. And so not only doing that groundwork in early September, but also thinking about shaping our work in a way that makes it useful to those council members that we'll come back to again, so that we can continue to go back to them with the advice of the commission, and that they'll be looking for that kind of conversation from us. So more to come. But if anybody has any questions on that not only feel free to ask Vanessa and staff, but feel free to reach out to Nick and myself as well.
Really minor question, and I know you probably don't know the answer because you don't know what direction it's gonna go in, but do you still want people thinking about and taking pictures? Do you still want us to like building a photo library for you?
So I won't say no.
Uh-huh.
However, I wouldn't want to have a bunch of you taking a lot of time to go out and look for pictures
Yeah.
that we may not use. Any pictures we will use eventually, right? But, you know, it's the middle of August and I don't want you burning up the rest of your summer. But if you happen to be walking or biking or
Yeah.
taking the train and like, oh, this is what this is what a livable, denser residential street looks like. Please, if we don't use it sooner, we will use it down the road. Because we're always looking for images.
If we take the picture, what kind of information do you want us to send along with the photograph? Do you want to know like where the address, where
Location.
Location?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And even if it's, so if it's just a street address or a intersection, that's helpful because then we can start organizing our images by areas of the city. Because I think something that Zio has brought up, and I know you brought it up. In whatever work we put forward, it's important to represent different parts of the city and different levels of existing conditions in the city. So obviously some parts of the city have a greater amount of amenities and sidewalks and trees and others don't. And so it's important to be able to express different areas of the city and where they are in their current conditions.
And the assignment previously was good and bad conditions?
The assignment previously was really more just good, like what could it look like? And I don't think or at least in the conversations to date, we haven't really wanted to lead with a negative of look at this awful street condition, but more sort of like different parts of the city have different levels of past investment, and this is what it looks like. And pairing that with, if we go down this route, the stay safe, healthy streets, those have been implemented in various parts of the city. So showing that you can make some, I'm not going to say low level investment, but you can improve a street without having to necessarily have to do sidewalks and curb cuts and whatnot. There are other ways.
Yeah, I remember a picture Dylan shared in chat.
Oh. Just very minor additions to put a date as well as the location since things do change over time.
I do think it's helpful if you have an example of a neighborhood that maybe you live in or you visit that doesn't have all of these amenities, where it doesn't have sidewalks or have curbs, but maybe is experiencing like homes or some change development pattern, because that is an example of what we need in different conditions. So it's good to have those, not just the like, this is an awesome street that it would be great if all of our streets look like.
So as Zio said, please reach out with questions and ideas, because that's going to be a big part of what John, Olivia, and I are going to be working on as we prepare for the next meeting in 2 weeks.
So just to clarify, we were looking at the expanded corridors initially as a independent work idea. And then we pivoted to go to more of a support role to support the centers and corridors legislation and how we do that. But now we're looking at both options and maybe doing one or the other, or maybe a combination. And that's what you guys need time to suss out. Is are we going to do, centers and corridor support? Are we going to look at corridor expansion, what that looks like, or some sort of combination of the two? Okay.
So we'll be fleshing out options and we'll send those to you all in advance of our next commission meeting, and we'll spend the full meeting. It's only an hour and a half, but we'll spend the full meeting with a structured working session around responses to the options that we propose. And much like an EIS, we might put out 3 options and you all will come up with a 4th that some takes pieces from each of them. And then we can proceed with working.
Great. If there aren't further questions, or if there aren't further questions that have materialized right now but might materialize later, then I'm gonna suggest that we can adjourn early.
Thanks, you. Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.